So here we are, and we are ready to add our train tracks and to add our beautiful talent and our wise old man. So what I have selected here is a few railroad tracks, and as you remember, I stepped to the side to shoot some tracks to avoid all this mess right in here, which is this, and then we have a little bit of extension that will take it past all this rubble right in here. For our talent, I picked two frames. This one right here, I love. I think it got great energy. There's a little bit of concern in her face. He is looking down the tracks. What I didn't like about this was the dress. It's coming right off being tossed in the air. And I just took a frame that was 2 frames after. I had my camera on high speed shooting, so it was just a pump, 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 and a few seconds later, not even seconds, you know, a fraction of a second later, the dress was down in here. So the stance is the same, the hands are a little bit different, but everything else here is the same, so it should fall right into place. And I want to overlay this onto the dress so we could get a little bit natural flow to it. So that's it. What we're going to focus on is what we briefly touched on in the car crash image. There's a few things we got to look at to really blend elements together. First, obviously, is perspective and the distance and all those things that we talked about over and over when it comes to making a good composite. When we do it on the computer, there's color, and then there's contrast and the obvious density. Those are the 3 elements that will determine if a picture fits beautifully in its background. So we're going to look at those 3 things. Again, density and contrast can sort of weigh into each other. Density obviously is the exposure, and the contrast is the level, so highlights and darks, and how those elements sit into the background. So color obviously too is a big one. So we're trying to match things with the light that we're shooting. So inherent color and light quality and contrast should be the same, but there's always a little bit of difference. So we're going to massage those 3 elements until we have the railroad tracks sitting beautifully into our background. We did not quite finish the background, so we're going to fine tune that when we know where Kim and our wise old man falls. Then we'll fine tune the mountains a little bit and move those around. So we're just going to dive in. Again, we just take this element and we drag it right in. We want to make sure that we come above our other layers. And as we measured the camera height and distance to the talent, this should just really fall right in there. We just line up the 2 different horizon lines. So we have a horizon line here and horizon line there, and that should really be it. So I'm going to pull her over a little bit right in here. We can close that out, and we're going to add the dress to it right away. And that will, as I mentioned, fall right here on top. And I'm going to take that away, and for now we're just going to hide the railroad tracks. We're going to focus on getting our talent cut out and in there beautifully before we start adding those. So we're going to come in a little bit so that you could get a better look at what we're doing, and we're going to turn the dress off for now. We're going to call this for talent, and what we're going to do first is just to create another folder. Again, we're going to call this talent. We're going to add a layer mask, and I'm going to try not to move too fast in this, but now we've been through this process several times, so I'm going to try to move a little quicker in the masking and then focus on the color and the contrast and the density, the things that makes this really fit together. So it's a fine tune to make tonalities of different pieces fit together, and it truly is practicing of color theory, practicing of yourself and your eye to see the subtle nuances of shadow detail and shadow color, and then highlight detail and highlight color. And those 2 things will sort of determine where on the color scale we will, fit these together. So we don't really need a lot of this stuff that goes on in this file. So I'm just going to delete this here. It's just extra pixels and a larger file than we necessarily need. So I'm just going to delete some of this here. All right, again, we start the selection process with our lasso tool. That's what I like, just to get a rough idea of where we're going. We hold down our option, which will give us some anchor points. I'm just going to come around this real quick. What we're also going to look at through this retouch is my way of blending hair, both hers and his, and getting that to sit in the landscape pretty well. I'm not a big fan of masking out here, and I talked about this in the conversation series, which was a tough one because we didn't really have the material there to blend it in. So now we have a rough idea of where these tracks are going to fall, and they sit way too high for sure. I'm going to just put Kim down in here somewhere. Let me see. I'm going to turn our mask off, and when I lined up those horizon lines, I think I lined it up wrong, or this moved briefly. So just keep jumping this Photoshop there. So that's roughly where we want it, and we're going to push this in here. So there's a few things we could look at to line this up. I'm looking right in here to find the horizon line, but this is not sitting that far away, and this is obviously a longer view. So maybe it's a better gauge to look at the grass here. So the top of the grass here and the top of the grass right in here. So maybe we just lower it a little bit and we try to find just about there should be a good gauge of where this should fall. So let's try to turn back on the layer mask, and this is really where they should be. It feels like it's not quite straight here, or these two files are not lining up. Probably shifted the camera a tiny bit, so I'm going to try to rotate Kim just a little bit. There. All right, we're going to follow the same selection process that we've done before. This is my, again, way of doing things. If you have a better way, please feel free to do it. Just going to use our magic wand, and we're going to come through all these spaces here. Now we're actually going to do this a little bit tighter and make sure that we capture all the white pixels. Not going to worry too much about the dress around here, and we're not going to worry too much about the hair either. So we're going to focus on the right side of her body. As we mentioned, we're going to replace that dress in a minute. And again, to get the plus sign going on our selection tool, it's just a matter of holding down the shift key, and that would allow me to click several times and come in and select all of this stuff and add to the selection that we already have. I think we might leave most of this here for after we've gotten the dress in there. So I think we're going to do that pretty quick here so that we don't waste our time masking stuff that lives underneath the new dress. So I'm going to come in and just do this real quick. So the reason for me selecting these edges is, again, that when we feather this edge, we want to make sure that we have selected all of it. If not, we're going to get this little shadow outline that we might miss and might stick with us and be a little ghosting later, sitting in the file. Make sure we get all this white shirt in here, like that. Cool, so much fun. And I think we could probably just take that off sooner rather than later, just there. Let's see what happens. Maybe keep some of that there. Cool. Then we're going to come in and we're going to feather our selection, and I think we're going to do 0.5. As these are crisper edges, we'll make sure that we do a 0.5 here to get started. And we hit delete twice, so we fill it twice so that bleeds into the edges a little bit, and we're going to come back in. And as you see, we have quite a bit of white stuff here that lives around the edges, and we're going to take care of that right away, even before we put that dress in. It's a fairly simple process where we again come in here and we hold down our command key, hover over the mask, and that will reselect our mask. Then we're going to come and feather this one more time. Let me see, for some reason there. I'm going to feather it again a pixel or 0.5 pixels, and we're going to command invert the selection. We're going to hide it, and now we can come in and paint. Let me see, I'm going to put this at 100%, and we have feathered our selection, and now we can just brush quite a bit around, and as we brush more, our selection or our brush will bleed into the selection, and we've done this several times, and it will help us fine-tune and get a little bit closer to the person with our mask. We did not do a great job up here, so we have to revisit that for sure. But this will be our first step in creating a decent selection for the two of them. So if you feel confident in your masking, you obviously don't have to watch me do all this stuff, and you could fast forward till the other parts that you might find more interesting. But if you want to keep on masking, and if you in this are having your own composite piece and you're doing this with me, then have this on one computer maybe, or next to you, and then or maybe even on your iPad, and see if you have another computer that you could retouch your picture in there, and we could do this together. That's a fun idea, and it's encouraging for me, thinking that you hopefully have your own pieces and that you create these pictures with me. So I'm going to come into our eraser. We're going to take a small brush and then just pull in some of this not so great masking right here in these corners. That went pretty quick though, so I think we have a decent mask here already. Cool. I'll do a few more of these. Now that I'm into it, maybe we don't have to revisit the cart at least. We are going to visit them for sure, but it'd be cool to just get this out of the way. There's some harder, crisper edges here, and I think we're going to keep those for now. They don't bother me too much, and it might actually be nice to have that black, harder edge. Perfect. So what we want to do before we go in here, I'd rather have too much than too little. So just want to make sure that we get all of his shirt, all of this guy's beautiful hair, like that. I'm going to work on blending both of their hairs into the file here shortly. I'm going to make sure that we get all this. Cool. Nice. All right, let's get the dress in there. We're going to pull that into our folder, and we're going to turn it on. And now I did rotate this file a little bit, so they're not going to line up perfect. So I'm going to make sure that we... Let me see. I'm just trying to find some anchor points here that I could look at, and let me see, we're right about here. So as I do this and try to line this up, I look at the tracks here, I look at the tracks here, I look at this edge here, and now it feels like they're pretty darn close. Cool. It's not perfect, but I think it's perfect enough. Yeah, you see the cart doesn't move much at all. It's a little bit discrepancy, so maybe we'll try one more time. And maybe I rotated it too much. I'm gonna come back a tiny bit. Shouldn't really be that big a difference. So there. I'm gonna add a layer mask to our dress, and we're gonna pick our most perfect lasso tool, which I use a lot for the bigger, introductory masking. So let's look at this dress. Again, we're going to do like we've done before a few times, just find some seams on edges that would be an edge to cut along at. So we'll start right at the waist and maybe follow this line down here and use this top edge of the dress. So we're going to come in here like that. We obviously don't need all this stuff, so we're going to take that away. Cool. I think this will be what we're going to use. So we're going to go Command-Shift-I, and we're going to fill the area around it now with black. And here's our top of the dress. You see it doesn't really line up perfectly, so I'm going to move it around, and then it sits pretty darn perfect as a tail right behind her. So a few things here that we don't want to use. So we're going to come into our talent, and we don't want to see this underneath there. So let me just take this away. And I think that's fine. So now we have a hard line down here. And as I mentioned a lot of times before, we don't really want to use a hard line. So I'm going to come in here and soften this up. Yeah, it's so dark in there, it will be impossible to notice what's going on. So let's mask out our new dress. Try that again. We have our magic wand, and then I'm re-clicking really close here to all these edges. Let's see if it works down in here too. Doesn't work too well, so we're going to do that by using our lasso tool. That was too much. I'm going to undo that. So this is going to be a little bit of a different selection process, and this is kind of fun because this will be a good exercise in masking, because up here we have crisp edges, which I choose to select pretty crisp, a little uneven in here, but there's definitely harder mask there. And you see down in here, there's definitely a motion blur. So as light travels and things are moving, you see you have this soft blurry edge here. So we want to make sure that when we mask this out, that we do create a little blur to this. And here as well, a nice little blur. Obviously we can't use any of the red because that's just going to look funny, but we can create that blur and use our mask and bleed it into the black to make sure that we see some of the background through that little piece of motion. So I'm going to go through that and use it as a good piece of exercise to see how light travels and how fabric blurs and create our masks to follow. So now I filled it, but I filled it on the content layer. So we're going to come back in here in our mask and then fill it, and then it will go away. So in me speaking about that, I forgot to feather our edge, and this is what we get, a really crisp hard edge. So we're going to come back to our lasso in the history. We're going to come in here and we're going to feather our selection. And now with this blur to the dress, I wonder if I should go a full pixel, and I blur this a little bit more. And then again, we're going to fill it. So Option Delete. And I'm going to hide it. I'm going to do a delete again. And maybe a third time now that we blurred it a full pixel. And with every time we fill it, we get a little harder edge. So we're going to deselect that selection. And then we're going to come in here and just do as good a job we can. And then we're going to follow through all this stuff again with brushes to make sure that we have the motion that we want. So I think there's a little bit of the dress coming in underneath there, but I don't think we need to worry about that piece. We're just going to come along for the main front of the dress here. I think actually the piece that I grabbed right there is a part of my 12 by 12 frame. For a second there it looked like it was a part of the cart, but I think it's a part of our gear that sits behind it. So we have these stoppers here preventing the cart from moving or going anywhere, so we're going to retouch that out as well and get rid of those. And I think we might want to add some motion blur as well, so that it feels a little bit more like this cart is moving. Yes, there's all this motion to her hair, there's the motion to the dress, but still it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere fully, having that cart or the wheels standing still. So we're going to come in and add a little motion blur to there as well. All right, for this one we already have a 0.5 pixel blur, so let's just start there. Or maybe let's just come up too late. I'm going to leave that there. Let's just try to feather this another 0.5 so that we have a full pixel feather to this. And we're going to hide it. And for this one, let's just start with filling that 1. So it's a little bit softer of an edge. You see, 2, crisping it up a little bit. And then we're going to recreate some of that motion blur that we see right in here, especially, and right up there. Those are the 2 biggest ones. So we're going to come in, enable that, and then come in with a brush. Let me see. With the brush, not the eraser, and just see what we could do at 10% opacity and just sort of bleed those edges a little bit so that we see some of that grass underneath. So I have this at 10%, but also at the edge of the brushes, it's going to feather even more. So that's why I'm just coming along using just really the edge of this to create this soft feather into these selections. Too much. Trying again. Too much. Not bad. I'm going to reduce it a tiny bit. There. All right, so this is how I would do this. Again, it's about how light feathers across or movement feathers across, and we see things behind, and then trying to mimic that with different edges or hardness of edges, allowing these selections to become closer to what they are in reality. So here we have this piece where we see white underneath, and I want to show you how I want to handle that part. For this area here, I'm just going to use my brush and roughly take away the biggest white pieces. So we're going to come in here, 10% doesn't quite do it, at 100%, and just paint in some texture here. Now since the background seems so dark, I don't have to be too tough on this. All right, I think that's fine. We're at 300% here. So again, when people look at this, it is going to read perfect to the eye. This area right here, It would be tough, right, to mask all this out and make it look good. So what we're going to try to do is to come in here and we're going to select this area. And then we're going to copy it and we're actually going to try to multiply it. Let's see what that does. So we're going to go copy, Command Shift Paste in place. We're going to put it on top here. And then we're going to come to multiply. And that will multiply. The white you see almost fades completely away. So let's see, we're going to select this, come into our talent mask, and we're going to take away the same area for the dress underneath. So let's see if that did it. Oh, I'm on the talent layer, which I should not be. I got to be on the dress layer. So let's go back here, select our dress layer in the mask, and then we take away, we should just increase this a tiny bit here. We're going to take away the dress underneath. And now you see with this multiply layer that we see straight through this and we have something that feels quite beautiful. So a couple of things. This feels a little too yellow. It doesn't have the blueness in the shadow or magenta in the shadows, which again start leading me into the qualities that we're going to look at when we really put these pieces together. And this could be a nice introduction. This is bluer, this is yellower for sure. So we want to take this layer, we're going to call it for dress, a little too many letters there, dress multiply. And we're going to try to see what we can do to blend that in there better. So we're going to come into our blue layer and pull that up. I'm going to make sure that these are connected. And as we pull this up, I'm going to see that it connects a little bit better to the tone of the dress. Okay, we're going to come into our talent here, and we're also going to make sure that we don't have this edge between them. So I'm going to make sure that these bleeds together quite nicely. Then we're going to come to our dress multiply layer, and we're going to take away this outer edge here. All right, obviously there's an overlap here that feels too dark. So again, we're going to come into this layer. We made it bluer, and then we're going to pull it up a bit. Maybe we want to pull it up in the darker areas so that that blend area here feels a lot better. Cool. You come in and fine tune the transition between the two and make sure that they just sit together seamlessly. Right, so we're going to come in here to our dress, and then we're going to have the dress just bleed softly into the selection. What I should have done is actually let me redo this actually. I'm going to take our dress multiply layer and delete it. What we're going to do is actually come further in when we select it. So we have something to blend with. I'm going to come into this area here. We're going to take our dress, copy, Command Shift in place. I'm going to put it outside. I'm going to pull it to multiply, and then we're going to add our correction layer. And now I have a larger area here to blend with, so it doesn't become that hard crisp edge that I just had. And again, I can come in with a larger brush, and it can probably quite easier get a little bit of that dress action beautifully blended in there. turning it on and off to see where that stands. I'm taking away some of that light edge that we had. And let me see. I'm not sure if you need this stuff down here, so let's just take that away. Again, sorry if that went too quick, but I use my lasso tool. I select it, I fill it with black, which will then be the same as painting on black in our layer mask. And as we zoom out now, I think we have a pretty decent edge here where we actually see through the dress and onto the background. A little bit of an edge here still, so let's just come in and try to push this even higher. Cool. I think that's good for now. We created a see-through area where there was white before, and I think we've done so quite beautifully with making it seem like the dress is layered right on top of the greens or the plants right behind it. So coolness. Again, it's a matter of bleeding into it rather than doubling up on it. I think maybe I pushed this blue too far because this feels quite good as well. So let's see. I'm gonna put that on and then just take down the opacity of this mask a little bit. There. So just in this area of the dress, we used 3 different blending modes. We used the crisper, harder edges, where we used the magic wand and we used the lasso tool. But then down in here with the blur, we feathered it a little bit with a brush, and here a multiply to actually blend layers rather than cutting them out or trying to mask on all these white little spots. Coming down in here, this feels a little bit too soft, so I'm just gonna try to brush back a little bit. Right there, that feels pretty good. And we're gonna continue our work to mask out all the stuff that do not belong to what we're doing. Again, we're looking at this stopper here. We're gonna retouch this out for sure. Create little shadows and make sure that that stuff goes away. And for this rocks here, we're gonna talk about that and how we're gonna blend this in. But again, for now, as I did with the open vista, I'm just gonna find some good edges along some of these rocks and just bleed around it. Oh, here I started. I was about to go up again, but... So why... Oops, I did it on the dress layer. Not good. We're going to come here and do it on the talent layer. So there we are. Now that fell away just beautifully. It's a little bit of the stopper right here. So, and we see it here, but it feels more like a shadow. So I'm not sure if you need to do much more to this than actually maybe taking down this right in here. Let's just do that right away. There, and I think we have some good references here in this. As you see, this wheel falls on the inside of the tracks and this just sits on top, so you do get a little bit of this opening right in here, there, and then we're just gonna retouch that out. And I'm gonna create another layer that we're gonna call retouch, and on this layer we're gonna make sure that when we choose our cloning tools right here, that it's current and below. And with these layers, there's probably going to be several things that we want to use that for to mask things out, and right there the stopper is pretty much gone. Let me see, we're going to mask this a little bit better. We're going to come in and use a brush and see if we can just make it a little bit more organic looking. There. All right, we're going to continue this process. We want to get rid of these rocks here for sure. So in here, let me see, if you want to keep some of these rocks, so maybe I'll just do something like this. Some random rocks up here, here, and here. And that might be too high, but let's just try it for now. Like that. And again, we're just filling it with black. So now there's a discrepancy here with what's going on in density and a little bit of sun here, which we don't have in the background. So we definitely want to create some sort of density here to match the layers. And you're going to take a look at that and reassess what's going on here in a minute. I'm going to just continue working on this though for now. The better we have it masked, the better and easier it will be for us to take a look at how to blend the contrast and the density and the color. Almost done. Almost done. See, as I'm trying to hurry here, I get a little bit careless with my masking. So we want to make sure that we don't do that and that you get to see this being finished. Cool. I'm not sure if this area through here is part of the cart or not, but I'm going to take it away. Again, just trying to find some edges that feels okay. This edge is obviously not all that great, but you can retouch out some of that stand leg in a minute. Cool. Way cool. Small little things here that we gotta take care of, but we'll save this for the finish. There's some chains here and stuff. So let's start looking at a few more things. There's actually a few more of these down in here. Again, there's a million ways to mask things out. So what I do like about using the lasso tool is that it has this built-in feather, so you don't have to feather every time. So that's pretty cool. This edge here has not gotten the royal treatment of a feather. So let's do this. We're going to select it. We're going to Command-Shift-I, invert it. We're going to feather the edge. And then we're going to hide it. And then we use our brush. And then we're going to come right into here. And we're going to up this to 100%. And we can just keep brushing into the feather and fine-tune this mask a little bit. Cool. You can do it in here too. Crispen that up. Cool. Feel pretty good about this. I'm going to do one more thing real quick because it's so distracting to look at the white seamless cutout. So before we fine tune the hair, we're going to use the same process on the hair for both him and her as we did for the dress. So instead of cutting it out, trying to fine tune this hair and making it look organic, we're actually going to do the same multiply process, and that way it's just going to blend it into the background rather than trying to really just trying to mask it out and put it in there, which we could do. And there's several tutorials on masking out here. And the way to do it, just briefly, is to come into your channels and select the color channel with the highest contrast. And that will help you, increasingly help you select the hairs. But again, hairs like this that's blowing and not quite sharp. And if this hair, you see she's a little bit soft in here, movement. And I've zoomed in a lot since I have a frame that went all the way from out here. And so she's just a small part of it, which makes me want to think that maybe I want to crispen her up a little bit. To be honest, I looked at that right in here, where we have softer edges here in crisper grass, which means we either got to sharpen this or soften the grass a bit. So let me see. It doesn't hurt to sharpen this a tiny bit. So let's do that first. I'm going to deselect so that we don't sharpen just the selected area. Filter, sharpen, and unsharp mask is my favorite. And I don't think you're going to do it that much, to be honest. How about 40? There. That feels pretty good. And you need to do it on the retouch layer as well. And now to get our last filter, again, it's just hit Command F. So it's Command F. And we do the same thing for the dress, Command F. And we're going to name this here. Since I deleted that and restarted, so we got to rename this for dress multiply. And this is our blend layer. And we're going to do the same. Going to do the same for her hair. Come into our talent, and we're just going to select along a nice edge right here. This stuff we could probably mask out a lot better and live with that. I think this area in here would be good to multiply. So Command copy, shift in, paste in place, and we're going to put this on top. And we're going to call this for hair multiply. And come up here to our blending modes, and we're going to multiply it. Then we're going to come underneath here on the talent. And of course, then we can try to brush away the hair. Oops, wrong tool. And what we see now is that the hair stand out pretty well. Now, what we have to do is not just use the multiplied hair, but we have to blend it in there. So let's just come in, I'm going to undo what I did, and see if we can turn this off for a minute. And we're going to come into our select palette. I don't really use this too much, but I think it could be good to try it. I'm going to do a color range, and then I'm just going to select the white. And hopefully this will help us select around the hair. And here you can sort of set, let's see if we can we zoom into that? We cannot zoom into our preview. So let's just start in the middle and see what this does. It's way too broad, way too broad. So we're going to try that again. And this time I'm going to select it, which I hope will give us a better preview. We're going to come in here. We have our content layer selected. Select. We see color range. And now we get a better preview. So I'm just looking here when we start losing the contrast, right? So just about there. At the highest contrast in here, I think we have a good chance of getting some decent selection. Cool. So now that we selected the white around the hair, it's easier for us to, when we turn this multiply on, to try to mask out some of the stuff that sits around. So we're going to come in here. Oh, we're going to hide it. Let's just see what happens. I'm going to undo what I just did. We're going to feather this. Oops, now I got to have a selection tool in order to feather it. There. Cool. Then we're going to invert this selection, hide it. Then we're going to come to our multiply, and let me see. Now if I just hit this button, it will fill this automatically, which I don't. So we want. So we're going to come up here to layer and add a layer mask and reveal all. That will give us the layer mask without it automatically creating a mask of the selection that we have. And we're going to come in here and try to delete some of the areas that's masked in here. Cool. So essentially what I'm doing is creating a multiply layer of the hair, and that will allow me for the hair tufts. We haven't really finished this up, but the areas that flies into and the hair that flies sort of randomly out, the small little things that make this feel organic, the selection feels too crisp here. So there's going to be a bleeding of the hair, and that's why we're going to put this on multiply. But we don't want it to be just multiply either, so we're going to blend the two layers. So the edges will be more multiply, and the inner will not have any multiply to it. So let's see now what we got going on. I'm going to turn off the talent for a minute. This is our multiply layer, and you see these areas here on the inside is bleeding away a bit, and we obviously got to do this as well. Take away these hard edges here. Cool. We're also going to do the same treatment to this. I want to pull in some more of this here. Cool. We're going to do some of what we did here for the dress multiply. We're going to try to brighten it up a little bit so that we take away some of these mishaps where we see the background blending into the background of the picture. So I hope you're following this. I'm going to come in here and let me see. I did create it real quick, so you're going to just attach it and then select it and then see if you could just pull this up a bit. Can't do it too much, but I think that's pretty good. I'm going to select what I did for the talent. I'm going to turn that off. So let me see the talent off, and then see if we can come in and brush some of this away. Hide it. Nice. All right, so this is our multiply here. We made it a little bit brighter. Now that we're starting to get our edges better, we might not have to do this quite as bright. So let me see. Nice. So let's see what we got going on. Now you're going to turn this on, and for the edges, we're just going to come in and just definitely and deselect, definitely take away this crazy bleed that we have. Then you can brush in and just see what this multiply is doing for us. A little too aggressive in taking it out, so we need to have the multiply bleed into these areas or bring back our real talent here into these areas like this. What we want to try to avoid is the white edges. Too much, too far out. So this is how this dance goes. We're going to fine tune this when we know exactly where we want Kim to be. So let me see. It's a matter of going between the two, making sure that we... Nice. I should have saved that selection that I did, because now I would love to go back to it and use it, but I'm going to just use the brushes for now and just try to get ourselves in here in a way that feels really good. Sorry, I hit the clone tool instead, or the magic wand there. Sorry, I hit the, oh, I forgot. I'm sorry, I hit the healing brush there instead. So let me see. I said we were going to fine tune this, and here I am diving in, fine tuning it. And as I mentioned before, this is my process. It's hard for me to be, oh, now we're going to do that, and now we're going to do this. It's really getting first a holistic view of the picture, and then it just takes me on this journey where I just get really into my zone. I get into my flow, and sometimes I talk to myself. Now, I luckily got you guys to talk to, but I often sit there and talk to myself saying, oh, no, yes, no, and it's kind of funny. So, and now you get a little insight to who I am, sitting there talking to myself, retouching, which is kind of fun. All right, so I think we have gotten to a decent place with the hair. So let's see, if I turn off this brightness layer, and I wonder if I just, I'm just toggling it back and forth, seeing, I think maybe I've done it too far. So I'm going to come up here and just take that down and letting it fall into the frame a little bit more. And I feel like we did a pretty good job there. So what you see in the shadow areas here is that the hair goes a little bit bluer because of the mountains behind. So what we want to do is to come into this curve layer that we created for the brightness and maybe just add some warmth to it. So we're going to pull down some yellow, and then we're going to add some red as well. I keep saying that I'm going to dive into the color and contrast to blend, and I've done it twice now, both with this area and with this, where we're in the multiply, where we see underneath. Here we saw the yellow underneath, I added blue. Here we see blue underneath, and we add some yellow and some red so that we could match the two pieces a little bit better. So I'm going to turn that off, turn it on, and it feels a lot better. I honestly think there's a few things here, right? This line down here can go away. And I'm going to take down the brightness a tiny bit more. Cool. All right, so we've done this side of the hair, pretty decent. And I think the other side here, we could just try to mask out. So we're going to come down to our talent, and just going to open up this edge again and do it over. So you see the edge here is a lot sharper than what she really is. It's a lot softer edge, and we have this jagged outline that comes all the way up here and around. So let's just try this again with our magic wand. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the layer mask off. So this will allow us to have this thing flow all the way around. And we could have used the color range right in here as well, to be honest. But now that I'm into it, I think this is okay. This edge we're going to feather quite a bit more than what we had. So I'm going to come down in here and do feather. Let's start with 1. Maybe we have to do more. And you're going to turn our layer mask back on. The reason for me turning the layer mask off as I did this, if you choose to use the magic wand with the layer mask on, it will only select the white areas that sit in, that is shown now in the picture, not behind the layer mask. So that's why I turned this off, and it allowed me to pick all the white stuff a little bit quicker. So now that we have this in here, we're going to hide our edges, and then you're going to just come in and we're going to paint. Let's see what this 1 pixel did instead of it being crisper. And I feel this is a little bit more like the edges that we want to have rather than what was there before. I still think we got to come in here and do this by hand a little bit, but it's definitely better. Cool. So I'm going to deselect. I'm going to come in here. So I think that feels pretty good. I'm gonna select this edge. Again, I'm gonna select the selection tool, feather, maybe 0.5. I'm gonna invert it and hide it. I'm just gonna try to get rid of some of these outlines that we have in here. So the dress is falling over right here. If this was a fashion shoot, I would definitely undo this white as if it's falling off. But for now, I think it's actually creating some good energy to the picture. So I just want to keep that there. I know we were in this area already, but now that I'm doing this black outline some places, I probably just want to continue and take them away everywhere. Whenever I do this, take away these edges, I always think about my teacher in my body figure painting class. And I'm a terrible, terrible drawer and painter, but it was part of going to art school. And he always put black edges onto the paintings and the figure drawings because it just helped outline things and it helped them pop. So think about that when I'm doing this. So maybe I'm doing the wrong thing here, but I'm into it and I'm feeling it and I'm going ahead no matter what old teachers have been telling me. So, all right, I think we got it. Now that I feel like I have a decent mask and can look at this properly, but for the outline of his hair. So maybe we should dive in and do that as well then while we're at it. Then when it's cut out beautifully, it's easier to assess contrast and color and the density. So let's just get into this and get the selection of this done. Kind of hard to see here, so I'm almost just making this edge up. So as I set these anchor points with the magic wand, I often get this sort of bumps right there, these crisper edges. So I'm just going to come in and undo those a little bit. Cool. I keep forgetting to remind you guys about your pieces. I get so into my own sort of zone when I do this. I really truly hope that you now are working with me in putting something similar into this background. So if you're masking out something, just tell yourself this is my masking way. If I do this here, multiply it, that's just my way. If you prefer to try to cut things out like this here, in my experience, it's way faster and easier to, you know, multiply that thing and blend it into the background and use the layers we have to sort of bleed the things together so it feels organic rather than trying to mask it out. So your process, your heart, your flow, your way is totally fine with me. I'm just showing you what I'm used to doing. So I'm gonna come in here and just select his hair. And again, we don't need to do that much outside. So I'm gonna cut that away. Again, I'm holding down the Option key to get minus and just took away a bunch of this selection. And then we're going to come in and copy it. So we're going to paste it in place. You're going to put it above. Now, in some cases, I put it below. But if you put it below, you get a softer blend. You then, I'm just going to show you. So if I put this on multiply, if I put this below, the hair will look like this. But if I put this above, you will actually multiply the hair that's already there. So you see you get a lot deeper and denser outline of the hairs coming up. Let me show you again. So in this case, it's better to have it above. So you not only get the hair blended through the multiply layer, but you get the multiply layer on top of the talent layer. So you get a thicker hair basically. It's really light and bright here, and what we're doing is to add some density to it, which will make it stand out more and make it easier to blend. So let's open up our talent. Let's add a layer mask to what we're going to call for guy's hair multiply. Again, into our talent folder, and I'm going to create, obviously, oops, too much. Undo. And we're going to come start, let's start that over. Sorry, we're going to come into our multiply folder first and see if we can create a little bit of a better blend for the areas where we don't want it to multiply. And we're going to come a little softer here towards the edges. So now we're starting to have a pretty cool outline of his hair. It's bleeded into these areas. Then we can come into our talent folder and take away some of these areas around. Again, soft brush, just blending it in, see if we can get rid of some of this white in here. Cool. Not perfect, but decent, I'd say, about this. It for sure can be fine-tuned. And what we did with the female here was to mask and come back and paint this in. But this hair is so tiny and ephemeral and light, it's going to be hard to mask anything in there. So I'm going to start with just masking softly out the edges of our multiply layer so it doesn't show, just bleeding it. And I think maybe just call it there. Just say that that's good enough for us to feel that that sits organic inside this photograph. So I'm just going to create another folder, and we're going to call this folder for multiply parts, or just multiply. How about multiply body parts? Cool. Now that we have cut this out in a decent way, I could actually look at this and try to reassess the three things that we're going to look at. It's the density. How dark and bright is it? Did we match our exposures properly? Then number two is the contrast. And obviously there's contrast and light. So we're going to try to match those so they sit together perfectly. In this, the sun was a tiny bit higher. Remember we talked about the landscape in the Capture One session where it's just hitting here and we only get half the power of the sun on the landscape. So this obviously then, just by the tone of the light, should feel a little bit more contrasty. And it does. We're going to start looking at that in a minute. And then there's the color. This feels definitely bluer. And you could see the tones in here, the tones in the shadows, feels definitely bluer than the shadow areas here. And when you reassess color and contrast as well, a good place to look is really the highlights and the shadows. It's hard to reassess that stuff right in the midtones. So shadows are the areas we have in here and the areas we have in the dress and underneath here. And when we look at this, we can just tell that these shadows here are really open. Here as well, really open, soft light in the shadows. Only the cows really that's in the bright sun get some darkness to it. So we want to make sure that this also has that same quality. So when we come into our talent, we're going to go above these. We're going to set our talent folder to normal so that we can add these layers without being a pass-through, without it affecting the layers underneath. We're going to call this for contrast. And I think in this case, most of the time we create an S-curve, right? I think in this case, we're actually going to try to undo some of that and go the other way. So if you turn this on and off, you see now in these darker areas that we lighten that up a tiny bit and we flattened out the scene. So I'm just going to start there. It's a little bit tough to judge right away. As I fine tune this, then I fine tune the color, fine tune the darkness, the density I talked about. It seems pretty spot on here. I don't think exposure wise they are really darn close. So we're not going to look at that right now. We're going to have the contrast, a little bit less contrast, and then there's the color. So it's definitely cooler. So we're going to come in here and add a curve for color, and we're going to come into our blue. I'm just going to pull that down a bit. I'm going to take down the highlights a bit. And a lot of what I'm looking at, again, is these areas in here. The gray here now has a yellow tint to it. The grays in here feels a little bit more neutral, to be honest. So maybe I pushed the yellow a little bit too far. So another thing, this here is actually sitting in sun. This is sitting more in the shadow. So maybe these highlights is what I should look at to match to these rather than these, which is shadow. And shadow gets a cooler tonality. As we talked about the color of the light, before the sun comes up, open shadow, it's cooler. And then when the sun comes up, it's warmer. And that exists in this microclimate as well. It's cooler in the shadows, it's warmer in the highlights. So I should probably judge this by looking at up here, sun for sun, similar light qualities. And with that in mind, this now feels quite a bit better. These highlights feel a little high to me still, so maybe we can go in and just fine tune this, but let me see. We're going to try one more time in our contrast and maybe pull this down a tiny bit right in there. And I think that's starting to feel better to me. I'm going to pull this down as well a tiny bit, and this even more. So by pulling these, both of them down, I actually make the picture darker. If I have this same shape to this curve, which is now an opposite S, if I have the same relationship in the curve, but it's higher, it's going to be brighter. And if it's lower, it's going to be darker. So essentially with the contrast layer, we float those up and down and we essentially adjust the density as well. Now, I'm going to give you a little tip. We talked about this briefly before. So we come up here to our hue saturation and we pull this all the way down. And now we could reassess contrast better. By taking away our color, we have a better sense if this is the right contrast. And now in black and white, this is starting to seem actually even more contrasty than I thought. This here is so soft, this is soft. In here again will be my reference. So I was on the right track, and I think maybe we should pull that even further into our contrast layer. Just tone down the white mostly. Maybe it's just at the top here. Tiny bit down to tone down the white highlights. Now, we do want the eye to go to them. We do want them to pop. So I obviously don't want to overdo it. So let's just stop there. I think overall, if I zoom out a little bit so I can reassess it, this feels pretty good as a black and white picture. You know that you're then in a good place when it comes to the contrast. So we can maybe turn this off and then reassess color. So here we are. And I think we've done a decent job. Instead of going less contrast on them, maybe we should come back underneath the talent folder and we could add a little bit of contrast to the background so that we can pull the highlights a little higher in here and here to match these highlights a little bit better. So what I usually do, I have contrast, color, and hue saturation usually for every piece, right? And every part that we try to blend in. At the top, I usually do a set of final adjustments, so to speak, that affect all the layers underneath it. And I think we're going to do this now as well. Let me see. I'm going to maybe tone this down a bit here. And we're going to come in and just create some color layers. So we're going to come into our yellow. I mean, we talked about this being a really warm and more uplifting scene. So I'm going to push that in, and mostly in the highlights. I'm going to pull that down quite a bit here. And there. I think that feels maybe a tiny bit too much, so maybe we'll pull this up here. As we pull yellow into it, that sits in the families of the greens, it feels a little greenish. So maybe now at this point, we do an overall red. So maybe we just push a little bit warmth in there, like that. Starting to feel pretty darn great. This feels a little bit warm now, and we have not sort of fine-tuned the color here as much. So we're going to come down to our talent again, into our color layer, which we're gonna rename color real quick. And maybe add a little bit of, I paused here for a minute and I looked back at the screen to reassess. I'm not sure if you want to add green or if you want to add cyan. So I think maybe we'll try a tiny bit of green first. There. Feels good on the people. This greenness in the rocks don't feel quite that well. Now there's another issue with these rocks, and that's the density of them. So I think if I'm just going to come in here, and again, our quick mask tool, and we're just going to paint in. I'm going to put that at 0 and see if we could tone these rocks down. I mentioned it on the rocks behind here as well. So let's just see if we can get those in there. Don't really want to select the wheel here. So I'm going to undo that for now. Cool. We're going to exit our quick mask tool, and then let's just see if we can add a little bit of density to the rocks here. I'm going to pull down the highlight only. There. And I think that's going to feel a lot better when we're going to start blending in these areas. So let me see. There's no reason to keep looking at my assistant Adrian here in this stance. We're going to take that away. There. And when I looked at these files earlier, I came into some focus issues. So I shot the talent at, was it 500 shutter speed. And with that speed, I managed to freeze the hair, and not quite freezing the dress, but enough so that it felt static. But with that come a shallower depth of field. And we want to make sure, since we have a good depth of field here, that we carry that through. So I'm just going to come in here. This is, I didn't move that. I'm going to undo that move. In here is just about where I start losing my focus on the tracks. So we're just going to take that away. And then when we lay the other tracks in here, hopefully connect it right there before I lose my focus. And we could push that into the frame. Blending these rocks and stuff in there, I did shoot some transition pieces. And I tried to lay them in there when I was looking at this file earlier on my own. And I didn't quite like it, to be honest. And I think what we're going to try to do is just use soft brushes and then paint in some grass on top to create the crispness. So it'll be something like this. I'm going to go even softer. So we get the two parts to bleed into each other a bit. Let me see, I'm going to use a smaller brush. Here. Now, as we see here, the sun sits on top and we get a little shadow cast by these. Not the best, this is a composite piece, so not the best measure. But right in here, you get a little bit of shadow behind the sun and these plants. And you would think that this grass would cast a little shadow as well. As you see right here, nice little shadow behind the grass. You would think that this grass would cast that shadow onto the rocks as well. So what we want to do is come in with a smaller brush, and right in here in that transition area, just make these rocks a little darker, as if the grass casted a little bit of shadow to it. So I'm going to exit our quick mask and invert it. Done that a lot of times. I'm doing it automatic. Hopefully you get this process by now. Again, we're going to come into our curves, which I use for everything. And this time, I'm just going to add some density. Right in here. So now we added a little bit of shadow area that hopefully this grass will cast. So you're going to come in here. You're going to let this grass bleed into it a little bit more. So a soft brush, letting the grass sort of sit in here. All right, I'm not going to fine tune this too much more at this stage. I think they're bleeding fine. And essentially what we're going to do is to take some custom brushes, or brushes that comes with Photoshop, but they're very different than this, that looks kind of like grass, and let that sort of be painted back in. And I think that would be a nice way to blend these two pieces together. So we're going to come on this side as well, and you saw me just roughly getting some of this in there, but I'm going to come in here and try to bleed some of these rocks into this grass. And as I started to lose my focus in the back, I also start losing the focus here a bit. And you see there's a sharpness difference here between these rocks and this grass. It's not a lot after I sharpen the frame with the people. So we still though probably like to blur the grass here in this area a little bit to make that transition a little bit more seamless. So I think we're doing pretty well here. What I want to do for sure is to remove these chains. So we're going to do that real quick. And then maybe we want to add a little bit of blur to these. So let's look at that first. I think that's bigger pieces. Then we're going to add our tracks and then fine tune a little bit of blending on the hair, maybe for both of them. There's a little bit of a highlight here, which I don't mind because of the sun, but feels a little soft for being what it is. So let's retouch these out, maybe get that leg out of there, do these small little things, and then maybe a little bit of blur, massaging overall. Still haven't blended the mountains properly, and now that I feel good about where they are, they sort of just fell right in. You're gonna need to fine tune these mountains. Can't be like this up here for sure. So, and there's a blue line right here. So, I'm just thinking, okay, one thing at a time. I'm gonna start with taking these chains out, then the tires, sorry, the wheels, no tires on this, and then we're gonna fine tune the mountains in the back. So we're gonna come to our retouch layer, which we already have, and then I'm gonna use some of these tools here. And let's just try and see if this will do a good job, or if no, it just bleeds through the yellow, which we don't want. So we're going to undo our healing brush and come to our clone stamp tool and just sort of work this away. And I'm trying to do this far enough away so that we don't get these patterns of double sampling and repeating patterns within the frame. So in this process, I always keep my hand on the Command C button pretty much. So I do this, I see how it looks, then I come back and undo it, try again. And again, it's a matter of blending really. Here there's a soft shadow, right? So you want to maintain that shadow. I'm going to call it a little bit bigger so this bleeds a bit, and then come back in here and let that bleed a bit so that we try to get a soft natural transition right in here. Not too bad. You want to take away that spot for sure. So 0 on the opacity, and then come back in and we take that out. So when I set my sampling points here, I just try to set them a little random here and there so that I don't sample the same places. So you get some up here and some up here maybe. So it doesn't, again, feel like we get these patterns. Cool. I think that's fine. There, chains are gone. Okay, so let's see if we can make a little bit of a blur to these wheels. Before I do so though, I am going to hit Command Save. And we've been working quite a bit here, so I just want to make sure that we save this in case something crazy happens. It usually does not anymore, but it's an old habit. I haven't actually saved this in quite a while, so it's good to do that in between. I just saw this here, some stuff that should not be a part of this file. So I'm going to take that out. And then we're going to take a look at these wheels for a minute. And we're going to use a little radial blur, and we're going to come into our talent layer. We're going to come up here. We're going to hold it down, and you get another drop-down menu. And we're going to use the elliptical marquee tool. And then we're just going to try to get pretty close to this. just about there. I think that's pretty cool. And then you're going to come and copy and paste that in place. So when we use a radial blur in Photoshop, it will take the center and blur it less, and as it comes to the edges, we will blur it more. And when we have this wheel right here, the center is not quite center, it's an oval. So it's important when you use this tool that we morph it a bit into a circle so that we can get that non-blur in the center. So now that we have selected and copied this, we're gonna just make it as much of a circle as we can. Just about here. And what I want to keep an eye on is the percentage that I do this at. So up there in the corner, you see the width at 137.18%. So let's just make it, let me see. Let me just 135. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it by hand. 135. There. The reason for this is that we want to try to shrink it back to where we were, so we could go minus 35% and hopefully end up perfectly back to where we were. So when that's done, we're going to apply this. We're going to, let me see, come in here, and we're going to select our area. And let me see if we, let's see if we can just use this selection instead of a square one and see what happens. So filter, we come up to our, let me see, blur, blur, and radial blur is what we want to use. So here we are. We have a couple of different options here, but we don't want to use the zoom. We do want to use the spin. Zoom is more when something comes at you and or traveling away from you, and what we want is a spinning wheel. We want to do our best quality, and this will give you a little bit of gauge, but that's a super fast spinning wheel. What we have is something that's really slow, so I'd say we're going to just do it really subtle and maybe do it 4 to start. This is a trial and error. Feels too fast for me for sure, so we're going to undo this, and we're going to come up here again, filter, blur, radial blur, and let's try 3. Fine. So this is the process. Now that we blurred it, we're going to hit Command T, and we're going to push this back. And hopefully we did 35 up. We could do 65 back. Percentages are funny, so that obviously doesn't work. So we just got to, I'm not going to do, let me see. Now that we've done it, we're going to, don't apply that. And deselect it. I'm going to put it at an opacity so we can see what's going on underneath. There. And then we can get a better gauge at where this line up. There. It actually looks pretty cool having it at an opacity at 60%. I think that's better than all the way. And I did it just to get a better sense of masking it and placing it back in, but I think a little bit of see through here, it's better. So how about 73%? We come in here, and then obviously we want to take away the blur that sits outside. And the reason for me masking outside is that, again, this will bleed. So if you made a perfect selection of the wheel to begin with, you do want the motion to bleed outside. Just like this dress around here was bleeding into the background, we ourselves want to give ourselves the room to let this bleed, this speed bleed outside and into the background a tiny bit. So there we are for wheel number 1. And I'm going to do, let me do the other one real quick as well. I'm going to show it to you one more time, but then I don't think we need to do this back once. You get the process, and I could do the other 2 on my own. So we're going to call this right close, as in right side of the cart and closer to us. And we're going to do the next one as well. Come in here, elliptical, and we try to select this as good as we can, just roughly. I think that's pretty good. copy, paste, and I so wanted to just push this out and push it right back in, but doing it by eye was better. So again, we try to make this a circle so that we get this closer to the center. This is where the quiet parts will be, and you see we did that pretty well here, where the center is standing more still and we get the blur along the edges. So there, I did it a lot more this time, so maybe come back a tiny bit. And now we can just repeat our radial blur up here, just pull it down. So now I did something that, well, you'll see what's happening. When we don't select this area or what we want to have blurred, it won't take this layer. It will take the whole frame and blur it. So now you'll see this is going to get really, really blurry. I'm just going to let this go so you can see the result of not selecting the area that you want to have blurred. Now it has put the center in the middle of this whole frame, and what you see here is the blur of something that would be way outside of this. So obviously it did not work. We've got to Command Z. We're going to select our wheel. Now we can just hit Command F again, which is filter, and execute the last one we've done. And we get the blur sharp in the middle and along the sides. We hit Command T, which is transform. And I'm just going to put this back, right back where it was. Now I'm doing it by eye. I should have done what I did last time using the opacity, but let's try. Might have to redo this. Yeah, for sure. So I'm not that far off, so let's just keep that move, and we do this, and we just pull it in a little bit more. Cool. We create our mask, and then we brush out the stuff that's on the outside. Now obviously we have the other wheel underneath it, so we don't have to be that careful when we mask this out. I just want to get rid of the blurred stuff around, obviously. Cool. So now we have a little sense of motion to those wheels on the cart. Those things I think you could do on your own. It's the same process. Just when you do this, just make sure you make a circle. So even if it's just this area you want to blur, you want to end up blurring everything. So you want to, maybe I should just do it real quick for one so you can see. Again, it's about making that circle. Command copy, Command Shift paste in place. We make it a little bit more a circle like that. Hit return. I'm getting good at this now. We select it, filter, and we go Command T. Oh, not that good. I should have remembered to put an opacity to this. But let's try there. Come down on the opacity. Hit Command T again for transform, and you can keep on pushing this in. And what I'm looking at is the sharpest areas. I'm trying to look at those little screws right in here to see if that lines up perfectly. And we hit Command D. And now you see we have all this blurring going on. So now that we have this stuff in here and here, I'm just going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to select the original mask and click here, and most of that fell away. Now this is a sharper mask, right? So we blurred this, but then we gave it a sharp mask, and it doesn't quite look right. Again, when you have something that's blurry, you want to have a little softer edge to it as well. So I want to come in here and just soften these edges and let, as we talked about, let the motion of things just blur or bleed a little bit into the background. So cool. And I talked about some opacities, right? This is 43 is too much, 70 maybe. I think we did 60 or something on the very first one. That felt pretty good. So that one we'll leave alone for now. I think you could figure that out. Let's just check out this second wheel we did. It's at 62. The first one we did, it's at 73. So I'm just going to come in here and set all to about the same. 72 is fine. And come up. Cool. I'm just going to put these 3 in a folder and call them wheels. This one here is our shadow, so I'm just going to call this for grass shadow. Cool. Call this one. Put these together. And now I'm putting them underneath the retouch layer. Really bad form. They have to be above the retouch layer. Because again, as I mentioned, we don't want to have these adjustment layers underneath because then it won't affect the retouch. And what we have cloned is not going to have the same contrast or color if we put these adjustment layers underneath. So I'm going to call this for maybe stone edge density. Cool. And we're going to zoom out a bit. I feel we're starting to get pretty close. Feels a little not punchy enough. So now that we have the layers blended pretty good, we had a color layer on top. That color, I think we're going to do a contrast layer on top here too and give it a little bit more punch. Yeah. As I do this though, the dress here and all this stuff gets a little too much. We don't want this contrast on Kimberly, which tells me that I should put the contrast layer maybe underneath the talent. So I come down here, I like it for the sky, I like it for everything else. So I just put that underneath the talent. And I feel like that's starting to get the density in here and in the areas close to the cart and our composite piece. So the contrast is now feeling a little bit better. And I bet you if you come up here and we, oops, sorry. I'm gonna grab our hue saturation, or we could do a black and white. Either way. And now you can do a measure on our contrast and it does feel better. Yes, I wanted the cart and Kimberly and our wise old man to pop, but contrast wise, after adding that contrast layer underneath, only affecting all the layers that sits below it, it seems like these are meshing more when it comes to the contrast. So that's a good measure. I mean, we could keep that in there and we can just turn it on and off, but I really feel like we're in a good place. We explored some hue saturation earlier. Oh, it's a black and white layer. And just take, maybe I'll keep it because I actually feel this is a little too saturated right now. So I'm going to come up here. When we added that contrast, I also saturated it a bit. So again, to not make a contrast layer affect the color of it, we could put this contrast layer on luminosity. So it does not affect saturation or color, but only the luminosity of things. So maybe we'll do that and we can just keep the hue saturation at its neutral level. So, all right, I'm getting kind of excited. I'm gonna start working on the mountains a little bit now that they feel like they're really good in there. Let me see. I'm gonna do one thing here. I'm gonna try to create a highlight just for Kimberly. Do this. Again, same selection process. We're gonna come in here. I'm just gonna brighten her up a tiny bit. There. I'm gonna call this for Kim, face, contrast. We have yet to add contrast. This is really just a density adjustment, but you know, it tells me what it is, and the contrast is, you know, if in case I want to add some contrast, it's already named. So let's look at those mountains. I'm going to come in here and name this for contrast. So we have that in order. All right. So let's see. We want to mask this area here, but I also feel like this line would be nice coming from the highlight and then come up and create what we got going on there with the mountains. So let me see. For now, I'm going to just move the sky, which we've cut out together with the mountains. I'm just going to move the two together. So if I want that highlight to come this way a bit and touch onto the sun. I'm just toggling back and forth to see if I like it. And I kind of do. I kind of do like it. Yeah. Maybe I tilted it too much. I do like this line though. So let's see. Before I tilt it back, maybe I'll just try this. Cool. In blending these, I'm just going to come and maybe I'm going to use more of the original mountain. See, there's some color differences here. So what if I just, let me see. Oh, doing it wrong. Gotta use the brush. What if I just, okay, that's a nice blend using some of these original trees. Maybe I could just use some of that there. Cool, cool, cool. What I want to do actually here is to try to blend this together a little bit better. So I'm going to come down underneath and I'm going to make a contrast on the horizon here. Obviously there's a density that's sitting in the mountains above, so I'm just going to try to do this, and I'm going to call this for horizon contrast. Come in here and push this down. Again, it's allowing different pieces to match by using color and using contrast. Oh, now I moved something here without having my sky layer selected. So I think that's easy though, to make the sky come along. So let's get that done. So when we built the background, right, I was exploring having the mountain on its own mask sitting on top of the sky, and this was why. It would obviously be easier to blend and get this stuff done if it wasn't like this, but I managed to bring this back together. That looks pretty good. Nice. Nice, nice. All right, so there's obviously some edges here that need to be fine-tuned for these layers to blend together. So let's take a look at that. I'm gonna come into our mountain, and I don't really know what's beautiful below and what's beautiful above here. So just to give me an assessment, I'm going to come in with big brushes and just see what happens. So this is obviously the biggest area where I need that contrast improvement. So I did it overall when I called this horizon, but why don't I just come in and create some density right in this area here. See if we can make the curves to the blending work for us rather than me trying to cut things out perfectly. So lazy, but I think it's kind of smart. So we're going to come back in here and do curves and push this down. And suddenly we see these mountains here start fitting together a little bit better. A little bit discrepancy in tone. And this is a good example of looking at the shadow tones and blending pieces for contrast and for color. So first we started with density. So we pulled it down, and now they're starting to feel decent when it comes to the exposure of it. But this feels a little bit more cyan to me than this does in the shadow. So I'm just gonna turn this off for a minute. What you see in here is more of a cyan shadow tone. We put these mountains on, and what we have in here in these mountains is a more reddish shadow tone. So obviously to blend these together, hopefully you got this down by now. You could go to Adobe, to the color picker. I think it's just adobe.color.com or color.adobe.com. And you could look at the color wheel and say, if this is too green, what do I need to add? And for me, it's a little bit of redness, I think. Red or magenta. So we're gonna start with red, and I'd say boom. There are those pieces blended a lot better together. Now this foreground here, maybe we say that this got too dark and this tree, so we can come in and modify our curve and undo some of this. I did that 100%, I'm gonna do it 30%. Increase our brush and softly then paint into this. And now we're letting the curves do our blending work and big brushes do our blending work, rather than trying to mask things out and wondering why these pieces are not quite fitting together. So again, soft brushes, pulling this in, and we could zoom out. Yes, for sure, this is feeling a lot better when it comes to blending these together. So I'm gonna continue doing this. Maybe a little heavy-handed. I think we can get away with a little less. I'm gonna come in here. Perfect. I'm really heavy-handed right in this area, so I'll just tone this down. Cool. This makes me really happy. I think we can add a little bit to this, just a soft brush up in here as well. Nice. I'm going to be a little bit better with this mask here. So now it's a matter of deciding, do I want to use the... Oops. I keep selecting the wrong tool here. It's my brushes that I want. Now it's a matter of selecting, do we want the mountains here that lives underneath, or do we want to use the layers of mountains that comes underneath? And wow, turning that off, that looks beautiful. That looked beautiful. I'm a little bit off, you see, on my horizon line here, but I don't mind it as much. But man, I want to use these mountains for sure. So I'm going to come in here and yeah, bring some of these mountains back in. Then I would need to cut the tree out, and I need to sort this tree out here as well. So maybe it's somewhere in between, to be honest, where I use parts of it and not others. Not that I want to be too lazy over here, but it's kind of my process. Oh, so first I'm going to try to move the mountains and the clouds back a bit so that the tree line up more with the tree that we have in the landscape, which will allow me to not worry so much about cutting that out. So sky and mountain, let me just push that back a bit. Obviously in here there's a color mismatch as well, so we got to look at that. Maybe we just expand this curve that we had back in here, and maybe that will solve itself. So we come in here. I think this, I didn't name this, but yeah, this was the blend that did the heavy work. So we're going to come in and just see if we can get some of this in there. Nicely done. Okay. This makes me really happy. Right, we're going to come into our sky and then just see if we can... Oh wow, look at that. We don't want to do this on our sky, that's for sure. We're going to come into our mountain. And we'll bring the mountain into this. So I'm obviously now going too much. I'm going to come back in and we got to get rid of that highlight because we don't want anything where the sun is. That's going to be too bright. And then maybe just try to bleed this away. See if you have a proper flare there. Okay, so let's address these trees here. Again, there's the option of cutting things out or letting them bleed together. So let's see what we got. I'm going to try to take the mountain away right in here and use the original trees and see what happens. Nice. Cool. So I could do something like this. Kind of nice. All right, so again, we're going to let curves and blends do our dirty work. So we're going to come in to our quick mask and we're going to select this tree up here. And we're going to come underneath all these layers to our background and exit and Command Shift I. And in this tree area that we want to blend into the background tree, we want to just give it some density. So curves, and we're going to just make that darker. So just by doing that, it sort of blends itself into the mountain a little bit better. Cool. Then we're going to turn on and off the mountain. Wow. It's a little bit lazy there, I think. I want to just take away all these and just use the original trees. See if we could figure out a way to get this done. It's not easy though, as these mountains blend together right in here. Right there. So maybe I could just use this part of the trees. Not bad, not bad. Cool. So let's look at this. It's a little bit funky there, a little bit here. Otherwise, it looks pretty darn good, as if this tree sits behind the others. And do that there. Nice. Could not do that. Let me see the mountains right in here. So this goes darker here, and this is part of what the blend is, why the blend is being funky. So I think I'm going to put it right there. And then I'm going to try to brighten up these mountains. So again, as I darkened the edge over there, I'm going to, oops, undo this, hit my masking tool. I'm going to brighten these up. And this got to sit in the mountains right here. I'm going to put it above the contrast. Again, it's a curve. I'm going to brighten that up. Way better. I'm going to call this tree blend. I'm going to call this tree blend. I'm going to call these for mountain blend. Select all, copy, and we're going to rename this mountain blend as well. Cool. So I think we're getting close. The bleed in here is obviously not right. So let's come back to our mountain and see if we can just blend this better, as if the sun really just pushes out. That takes our trees, doesn't it? But maybe that's nice. Maybe a little opacity to these trees. Not nice. Let's see. Let's undo this. Back at it. And let's see if it's... Yeah. I'm going to use this tree blend curve. Not only on the trees, but also on the mountain behind it. So as I do this, hopefully this blend here we could keep and still get something that looks decent. Looks better, for sure. I don't like being in there, so thank you. Cool. I see now with this contrast layer, I actually added density into this area. So I'm going to turn that back on, and I'm going to maybe push the mountains a little bit higher in the highlights, and I think that would do it. Maybe we can even brush some of this out. So come in here and select it, and I brush this out so that this contrast density layer does not affect our mountain in this area. And wow, I think we're pretty darn close. It doesn't feel quite rich enough yet. So when I look at this, I look at some richness, and it feels a little dull. And I mentioned this before when we created our top contrast layer, but then I pulled it underneath the talent. So maybe it's about doing another one, and we put it on top of the talent. Nice. I think I'm going to push the color too. I like it. Cool. We're gonna save it again. I'm gonna put this here for you guys to see. I don't want to put it there. Nice. I'm feeling kind of excited. I think this is a really, really good place to be. I'm going to add the railroad carts. Sorry, I'm going to add the train tracks to have those continue into frame. And the first one, just going to drag that in here and line that up. And you're going to close that out. And obviously we want to use as much as we can of the color and the tone we already created. So maybe we just put it down in here maybe. Let's see. Above the talent for now. Maybe I'll just put it underneath. See where our train tracks end. So with these, which was shot a little bit earlier in the day when I did some back plates, it's even a bigger discrepancy when it comes to the exposure for sure, the color of it. And luckily we're not going to blend a big piece of this. We're just going to use a smaller piece. So that will help us out for sure. So we're going to create a mask. I'm going to call this for tracks 2. And we're just going to start masking them in there. So let's just see. Like that. I don't want to. Cool. I'm going to put this above. Sorry for stuttering a bit there. You know, I'm thinking out loud as I'm working on this. So what I'm looking at is two things. I'm trying to find the horizon line so it matches up. So I'm going to do this, turn that on again. And you see the horizon line is right in here, a little bit higher. So I'm going to come down a tiny bit. But also looking at these grassy things here, right? So the grassy things line up. So, and now in here, the tracks line up well as well. So I think maybe that's where we start. That feels pretty darn good. Cool. So now we're going to do the 3 things I talked about initially. This is our kind of nice, too dark though. I'm going to pull this down. This will be our density layer. And we need to take down the top anchor point. I'm going to keep on doing this till we get to a place where we feel we're really close. I think that's pretty close. Feels too contrasty, and to avoid contrast when we do this is to just pull down the top anchor point. And as you see this, you see it's getting less and less contrasty, and at this point we could actually just pull this up as well. Feels too red or magenta, a little bit unsure of what, but this feels way greener almost in here. So let's start with getting some color in there. I'm going to call this for contrast. And we're going to come back up. Oops, did not mean to grab that. To our curves. This will be our color. Let me see if you have to anchor this. Oops. There, and we need to anchor it there. Cool. I think maybe I'm just going to stick this in the folder right away, and I don't have to anchor all the layers. We call it for tracks. And the other tracks might fall right into this as well. Put this on normal, and that will allow me to not worry about connecting these. So this will be our color. I'm going to start with a tiny bit of blue. That's not bad. Then we're going to come in and do a tiny bit of green. There. We'll come to our contrast. And then I'm going to zoom in a bit. Now that we have roughed it in there, I'm just going to look at the difference in these rocks. Oh, so here's something that's interesting. And these, my sharpness is up here, and here the sharpness is kind of gone. So we want to make sure that we, when we blend these, that we take away, it starts, oops. It starts about here. Let's see where our sharpness starts on the other. Oh, so I kind of missed it a little bit, didn't I? A little bit gap in focus here. So I just want to look at these then and see what's probably best is to grab it from the tracks, from the talent. And maybe we would need to, let me see, do a little individual sharpening here to connect these pieces. Yeah. But now the tracks don't line up as well as they did a few seconds ago. But hopefully that is just a matter of moving them over a bit. So we're going to come this way. So I do this, it feels like they're shooting way off, right? So what I want to try to do here is rotate these and do this maybe a little bit. Cool. All right, I think that's, maybe I gotta just squish it in a tiny bit. So if everything had been clear, if I didn't have those posts and stuff standing in front of these tracks, this obviously would have just fallen into place perfectly. It would have been just a left-right like you see me building backgrounds. But in this case, I had to step to the side a bit, so these will never really perfectly line up. But I think this is close enough for now. And when I was preparing for this, I found another piece to straighten itself out and flow into here a little bit, because now this is heading straight for this area. So I could have just maybe taken this and, or maybe I should do that already. I don't have to put any more pieces in there. So let's see if I take just this. Good ideas are coming as I'm talking. I'm gonna do this as a square. And about here maybe, in that little crease right there in the tracks. Copy, paste, and I'm gonna make a mask there before I move it. Take some of the stuff away. I might not be able to use this anyway, to be honest, because it might not stretch far enough. But the idea was that I would just come in here and warp it a bit so that these train tracks turned and did not go into the forest, but sort of disappeared in between this grass here. So I think that's enough. Cool. I think that'd be pretty cool. So if I do this, I don't have to tie in the other tracks here. So I think we'll start there. Now that I have two pieces and they belong together, and I just warped it really, instead of having two masks, I'm going to come in and create one mask. So I want to keep what I have for the bottom already. So I just select it and then I click my create layer mask tool. And now I have the same mask here as I do down here. So now I can just delete that mask really, or just fill it with white so that bottom mask goes away. Now I can continue masking for this whole piece, which includes these two pieces here, one that's pulled down and one that's straight. So there. I'm gonna then come into this layer and just do this. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. So let's see. I'm gonna make my brush smaller so we can see it. So it's coming into these plants right here. So just want to see where those plants are. Here. Nice. Now we could allow the tracks to just flow into these. So it was nice to see it right in here. I'm just going to try to work my way in here. This is so far back. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of fussiness to it. Too much. And I'm going to go through this whole thing a little bit, as if you can see through the grass, like that, and like that. And I'm just doing this at a really low opacity here, so that we maybe can see that the tracks are disappearing into it. what happened. I changed my master opacity. I did it on the layer rather than on the brush. So back on the brush, and I wanted to push some of this back in there. Nice. So as I started telling you earlier, I just wanted to soften this and try to blend rocks and grass into each other and use some of these harder pieces as I did it. And then we're just going to draw in some grass afterwards here. The back ledge here, I think we can just take it away as if you don't see behind it. Or at least just use a tiny, tiny bit of the rocks. Just a little bit, like that. This could just go. It's a pretty soft brush. So now we're doing this at 400%, and this, again, I don't think at this stage we need to cut this out any more decent than this. But as we get closer to camera, obviously things matter more. And we are going to fine tune this for sure. Cool. Fun. I'm really excited. It still feels a little contrasty, this whole area. So I'm going to come to my tracks and pull this down and pull this up. Great. We're getting some really big grassy things here that kind of messes with our perspective a tiny bit. So I think I want to just try to retouch those out. Okay, so now that we've done this and roughed this in there, I'm going to bleed these into here a little bit, these rocks. It's kind of nice if they bleed into this white area. The ticket will be to create some grass that comes in front of it. So it's not just a bunch of soft brushes. So we're going to come to our window, going to pull up our brushes, and we're going to come down into, let me see, here. We'll try the triple one. So there's one with 3 and there's a single one right here. So we'll start with the 3 sum and see what that does. And then you could use this tool here to sort of put the direction for where you want these brushes to go. So let me see. I'm going to put this over at 100%, and that did not do well. Let me see, because we're on the wrong layer. We'll come in here, and that did not do well either, because we need to pick a brush rather than an eraser. And then we're going to do the same again. Come in here. I'm going to turn it over a bit. And then we're just going to come in, and maybe at a little bit more of an opacity. And I'm just going to do this, and what happens is that we're now sort of painting in some sharper grass in front, and hopefully this will make it believable to the eye that the rocks are sitting behind and underneath they blend together nicely. Sorry for the skipping here. We're gonna, as we got away from the camera, we're gonna try to do this a little smaller, and up in here even smaller, and here I want to turn them maybe this way a bit. Make it a little bigger. So we're doing this in the foreground to create the sense of, here you see it better, a sense of grass coming up in front of the rocks. Now here, the rocks would be in front of the grass. So we're going to come back to our normal brush. And in this instance, we got to create harder edges and let the rocks sort of come butt up to the grass, and then maybe use a softer round brush and let the rocks come in between the grass afterwards. So I'm going to try to create a little bit of a harder edge. Oh, now I'm pulling too far down. Now I'm drawing in, not by much, just a tiny bit. And I gotta line these tracks up a little bit better too. I'll just really just rough them in there. Maybe I can just, perfect. They did find each other. Nice. I'm just gonna take away some of what I just did so I don't have, you come back onto the talent, real talent layer, and you bleed some of these rocks in there. Right about here, you can use these still. Okay, sorry if I'm talking slow or low, but I'm just mumbling, I guess, a little bit as I think and as I do. So my apologies for not keeping you fully entertained in my focus of retouching rocks, and you probably are done looking at it. Hey, you want to have some fun? Let's look at this guy retouch rocks for half an hour. Oh, it cracks me up. So I hope you're still with me and I hope that you're learning something, but this is how I would do this. Just go through a little bit here and there and then create these softer edges. Cool. These edges here feel fine. Here it feels a little sloppy. So here, along the straight edge here, we would there wouldn't be anything in front or behind. So we really just got to try to find a way that feels good to the eye as this falls down. It's definitely too bright in here. So I think we can, as we did further down, we blended the edges a bit by adding tone and color to these. So I think we need some darkness in here, as if the grass cast a shadow onto it. So I'm going to do that pretty quick. Command Shift I, and it's a pretty wide shadow, to be honest. Maybe I should just, I'm going to just pull it out this way, and then come to our curves. Let me pull that down. Yeah, that feels better already. Call shadow edge, maybe. Nice. And then you're gonna come in maybe with a tiny bit of a softer brush and let that sit in there. Cool. I want to see that leg here, so I'm gonna do that real quick, as if there's no rocks for that little area right there. This is so close to camera. Here we just got to be a little bit more careful. These rocks are in front of the grass, so they would probably sit there pretty good. And then maybe there would be a few pieces or straws in here. So let's get our brush in here. And you're going to turn on our shape dynamics. And then maybe just try to brush some of these straws in here as if they come up between the rocks. Feels pretty good. I wonder also if I can just, this one doesn't feel so good. that one away. Cool. I mentioned the grass was a little sharper here than the rocks. It doesn't look so bad, but obviously it's just something that we should pay attention to. So I'm going to turn off the shape dynamics for now. I'm going to come into, since I'm doing a central sort of blur here, I'm just going to do it right on the layer. So we're going to come down in here to our back plate, and let me see, here we are. As I did there, you see I got some residue here, so I don't really see it in there, so maybe it's fine. And then we're going to come in here and select our layer, and then we're going to blur that a little bit. So I'm going to come into our blur tool and just really gently, let me see, strength 20% maybe, just come in and brush over this once or twice. So I took this too far, so I'm just going to come back. Wow. Let's try it again. Better. What I would usually do here, to be honest, is to just take a little piece here and copy and paste it on top, and I would blur it, and it will give me a little bit more control, but I think it's so subtle in there that it's fine to do it right on the layer. All right, I'm going to take a 2-minute break. We're going to save this, and I'm going to take away that for you as well. And as I come back, I'm going to do a fine little fine tune. What you see up here in the sky, we got a little bit of bending. So we're going to try to address that by adding some stuff on top. We're going to briefly go through all our masks. So there's some blending in between here in the mountains that I want to take a second look at. We want to come through here and make sure everything is okay. I have an extra piece right here for some grass. Maybe we fill this space. As I mentioned, we're going to fill out this composition here. So maybe we add that. And, you know, there's some issues right in here with the blending. So 2-minute break, and we'll come back for what we will call the polish, really. This is my process always when I have something like this. I often print it out, I lay it on the floor, I look at it for a day, maybe I look at it for 2, and I write on that print. I write, this is too empty. I write, look at this, look at that. And when I come back to my final stage, I actually have a little bit more structure to what this process is. It's really coming in, fine-tuning it, and then that's it. So the picture is pretty much done visually. Now it's a fine-tune to make it so that it holds up if you want to print this. If this was at a billboard in an airport, I see my pictures there quite often, and I always go up close and I take a look, not only on my pictures, but on other people's pictures too, to see how the edges are and how the retouching is. It's really when you do those big Duratrans that you really get a good look at all the pixels in a photograph. Otherwise, you will never really tell. So I'm gonna take a quick break and I'll be right back.